My name is Nadine Strossen. My major current position is as a senior fellow with FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. I am also an emerita professor of constitutional law at New York Law School and a past national president of the American Civil Liberties Union. As you can tell from my affiliations with and leadership positions with the ACLU and FIRE, I am profoundly committed to human rights and to civil liberties. For many decades throughout my entire adult life, I have been advocating, educating, and writing about the importance of all of our civil liberties for all of us. In the past 10 years, however, I have narrowed my focus to a particular subset of all of our civil liberties and human rights, which my experience and my study of history have convinced me is the most important subset of those rights, namely the rights that are protected by the First Amendment. Freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, freedom of belief, religion, speech, and press. I continue to believe fervently in the whole agenda of the ACLU, which is to defend all fundamental freedoms for all people and to defend the constitutional aspirations that all people are created equally and have equal rights. However, I have come to understand that the most essential prerequisite for defending and advancing all of these rights for everyone comes back to freedom of speech and the associated rights. If we do not have freedom to inform people about their rights, to advocate for those rights, to defend them in court, and to demonstrate and protest when they are violated, then those rights will be nothing but what James Madison, who was the principal author of the Bill of Rights, called a mere parchment barrier between people and government abusers. In other words, the grand words of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and so forth, are worth only the paper they are written on, unless there are real people who know what those rights are willing to stand up for them, are willing to demand that government officials respect and protect them, and are willing to fight when the rights are violated. In fact, if you look at the history of the First Amendment, it was ratified in 1791, but it was completely a dead letter for the vast majority of its existence. For most practical purposes, there was no meaningful freedom of speech in this country until the middle of the 20th century, as the First Amendment was approaching several hundred years old. And why did that happen? It happened because at the beginning of the 20th century, a couple of foresightful individuals, women as well as men, black people as well as white people, a cross-section of our country, people who were advocating for full and equal human rights, formed new organizations, including the ACLU, including the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, precisely to turn the paper promises of the Constitution into real rights for actual people. And one of the reasons why I have dedicated myself full-time to renewing those free speech rights in the recent past is that I see a younger generation of social justice activists, progressives, who wonderfully support human rights, especially equality values, DEI values, diversity, equity, inclusion. Nothing is more important. but many of them do not seem to understand how critically important a robust freedom of speech is for them to effectively advocate their causes. We have heard too many people make arguments such as, well, you have to choose between free speech and equality, or even more broadly, you have to choose between civil liberties and civil rights. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every single movement for human rights and social justice and equality and inclusion throughout our nation's history has succeeded ultimately only when free speech was protected for it. That was certainly true for the mid-20th century civil rights movement, which was able to flourish specifically because the very same Supreme Court that was very hospitable to equal rights and civil rights for the first time started strongly protecting free speech. There are many wonderful quotations I could share from Martin Luther King and other leaders. Let me choose just one from the great civil rights leader. John Lewis ultimately became a longtime member of Congress, and he said, without freedom of speech, the civil rights movement would have been a bird without wings. And the converse is true. Censorship has always been the greatest tool for suppressing equality. Most people know that Martin Luther King wrote his famous, eloquent letter from a Birmingham jail, but most people don't know what he was in jail for. What crime had he committed? Well, the so-called crime was what we now consider to be the most important exercise of First Amendment rights in our democratic republic, namely protesting peacefully, demonstrating, assembling with other people, petitioning the government for a redress of grievances to protest unconstitutional, inhumane, discriminatory, and violent conduct by the government. So, you know, we all learn that you have under the Fifth Amendment a famous right to remain silent. I think an even more important point, strike that, I know that an even more important right is a right that all of us have and not enough of us exercise, and that is the right not to remain silent. So I hope all of you will help us with the continuous process of turning the aspirational ideals of our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence into real, meaningful rights that are enjoyed by everyone. Thank you.